Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're mapping out some incredibly controversial, intensely debated claims that have been making waves recently, brought forward by Member of Parliament Rupert Lowe and commentator Ali Tabrizi. Now, our goal here isn't to take sides, right? We're just going to clinically and objectively map out their arguments about immigration, Western society, and their core assertion that the West absolutely cannot let Islamic ideology take over its cultural and legal structures. Let's get right into it.
To help us digest all this heavy material, we're going to break it down step by step. We'll start with the origins of these viral claims, then look at the economics, claims of parallel societies, cultural incompatibility, the grooming gang report, and finally, Tabrizi's final warning to Europe.
Okay, part one, the viral podcast claims. Let's look at exactly where all of this started. So, the source material we're looking at today is a breakdown of a massive viral Joe Rogan interview with MP Rupert Lowe. Commentator Ali Tabrizi basically took that entire 2-hour conversation and distilled it down for us. And the big overarching thesis from both of these guys, mass migration, specifically tied to Islamic ideologies, is systematically threatening Western civilization. They argue, point blank, that the West simply cannot let this ideology take over. It's a massive, sweeping claim. So, let's break down exactly how they justify it.
Moving on to part two, economics and border control. This is where Lowe starts getting into the actual mechanics of the situation.
Lowe estimates that right now there are somewhere between 1.8 and 2 million people living illegally in Britain. I mean, think about that for a second. That is literally the population of a major European city. And according to Lowe, what's drawing them in is instantaneous access to cash and housing the absolute second they step foot on British soil.
Then he points to the money being spent to stop this. He claims Britain is handing over more than £500 million to France every single year just to stop English Channel border crossings. But in his view, this strategy is a total failure. He argues that border patrols are essentially just acting as a taxi service, picking migrants up and putting them in hotels, all on the British taxpayers' dime.
And here's where Lowe really pushes back on official labels. The government calls these arrivals asylum seekers, right? But Lowe flat out rejects that. He calls them economic migrants. He argues that today's woke culture has created this massive, undeniable incentive for migrants to just exploit the British welfare system. He even claims they're getting priority access to things like dental care over actual British citizens.
All right, section 3, claims of parallel societies, because the argument goes far beyond just economics.
Lowe argues that instead of integrating into British life, certain groups are basically setting up completely parallel societies. He claims huge areas of the country are actually operating under Sharia law, complete with their own separate courts. And here's the huge contradiction he points out. He says this parallel legal system totally bypasses UK law, yet the government knows all about it and just tolerates it.
To show us what he thinks happens when you tolerate this, Lowe points straight to the history of Lebanon. He argues that back in 1948, Lebanon was this very open, enlightened Christian country. But according to his telling, once the Muslim population crossed that 15% threshold, the demographic shift directly sparked a civil war. And the result? Today, it's a country heavily influenced by Hezbollah. Bringing things over to the U.S., Joe Rogan brings up Dearborn, Michigan. He uses Dearborn to highlight what he sees as a huge irony. Progressive inclusivity welcomes in fundamentalist cultures, but as soon as those cultures actually get political power, they immediately tear down those progressive values. He uses the city's banning of the pride flag as the ultimate proof of this paradox.
This leads us right into part 4, cultural incompatibility assertions. This is the absolute core of their argument.
Tabrizi and Lowe are basically pointing a massive spotlight at what they see as a glaring contradiction. They're asking, how can Western progressives be so totally obsessed with inclusivity and so terrified of being called racist, while at the exact same time supporting a culture that, in their view, relies on strict female subjugation, extreme homophobia, and honor killings? For them, these two worldviews are just 100% incompatible. The West, they argue, absolutely cannot let this ideology take over. To really hammer home how intense this cultural friction is, Lowe brings up a report diving into the mindset of certain perpetrators. He claims that some groups actually view non-Muslim white women as literally just meat to be abused. For him, this shows a complete and utter lack of respect for Western matriarchal norms, making it fundamentally dangerous for women in these host countries.
And that disturbing point brings us to section 5, the grooming gang report. These are definitely the most harrowing claims we're looking at today.
Lowe cites a recent gang inquiry report, and the number he points to is genuinely hard to even wrap your head around. He's talking about a minimum of 250,000 rape victims spread across 147 different parts of the UK. And what's wild is that he insists this jaw-dropping number is actually super conservative because the state has totally failed to collect the data properly.
He makes it very clear, this is not just random street crime. He describes highly organized, horrific criminal networks that are trafficking girls as young as 10 years old. And the key piece of his argument here? He says these crimes are driven by power, servitude, and this deeply ingrained religious belief among the perpetrators that they are just inherently superior to Western infidels.
And this is where Lowe actively rebels against political correctness. During a speech in Parliament, he flat out refused to use the officially approved term Asian grooming gangs. Instead, he rebranded them right there on the floor, calling them exactly what he thinks they are, pointing directly at a specific nationality and religion. He argues that using a broad term like Asian unfairly drags in other cultures that have absolutely nothing to do with these atrocities.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Tabrizi's final warning to the West.
Commentator Ali Tabrizi takes all of Lowe's claims and zooms out to look at all of Europe. He uses this really stark mathematical funnel to show how official crime stats are, in his words, a massive undercount. Think about it like this. He says if you have 100 victims, maybe 10% actually go to the police. Out of that, maybe 1% actually results in a prosecution. So when you see a reported figure of 7,000 cases, he's arguing that actually represents hundreds of thousands of completely hidden crimes happening right under our noses.
He then shifts to international stats, specifically looking at female genital mutilation. Citing rates like 99% in Somalia and 85% in Egypt, Tabrizi argues that these aren't just isolated, fringe incidents. He's saying these extreme practices are standard, widespread cultural norms in many Islamic countries, and that these are the exact norms host countries are blindly importing. Tabrizi closes out his commentary with a seriously alarming checklist of threats. He's basically begging his audience to wake up, warning that if the West doesn't push back right now, we're going to see the normalization of jihad terrorism, acid attacks, honor killings, and extreme societal dysfunction, which he links to high inbreeding rates in places like Pakistan. His ultimate, undeniable message is that the West simply cannot let this ideology take over.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, mapping out these incredibly intense claims leaves us staring down a really profound question. How exactly do modern democracies balance their core progressive ideals of total inclusivity with the intense cultural frictions, the systemic crime allegations, and the deeply opposing worldviews we've just laid out? It's a question that literally tests the survival and the limits of Western ideals. Thanks for sticking with us as we unpacked all of this.